Okay guys, it's time to start lab number 6, the integumentary system. Basically the skin and its accessory structures. Functions of the skin. What do we have the skin for? It protects us, protects the inside of our bodies from chemicals, from mechanical abrasion, being rubbed or kind of like carpet burns, thermal damage from heat, and bacterial invasion. The skin also acts as an insulation and a cushion to protect the deeper and vital organs. One of the biggest functions of the skin is to keep us from losing our water and dehydrating. That leads to death awfully quickly. The skin is also going to be involved in regulating heat loss. The summertime that we're in, the temperature goes up too hot. We use the skin and the sweat glands to help us to lose heat. We use it to excretion. We lose some of the urea. Not all of it goes out in the urine. Some of it goes in the sweat and salts and water. The skin also, 20 minutes a day, is sufficient for us to synthesize all the vitamin D that we need. And then finally, we have nerve endings in the skin to tell us about what's going on around us. Temperature receptors, pressure, touch, so forth. Basic structure of the skin is divided into two parts. Let me do it over here so it's easier to see. You see this zigzag line that we're making here. Everything above that zig line is the epidermis. Everything below is the dermis. Now, of that dermis, about 20%, the top 20% is going to be areolar, loose connective tissue. And then this 80% here is going to be dense irregular connective tissue. The hypodermis, also is called the subcutaneous tissue, is going to be a lot of fat, some fascia. These guys are bound together. Can they ever come apart? Sure. If you get a blister, that's what happens. When you get a blister, the epidermis separates from the dermis and it fills with the fluid. Okay, we've talked about all that, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so there's our epidermis. Now, that layer of what's under the epidermis must be the dermis. Epi means above. And we've already talked about the top 20% is areolar loose connective tissue. It's called the papillary layer. The 80% that is dense irregular is called a reticular layer. Yeah, let's go ahead and do this, and then I'll go over there. As far as those nerve endings, you can see the nerve structures come here. Those are free nerve endings, which a lot of those are for pain reception. There's a lamellar corpuscle. They've also called a Pacinian corpuscle. Those are for deep pressure, because in order for these guys actually get deformed like that. And that's how they detect deep pressure, since they're so deep. And of course we have others that are closer up here, and that's for light touch. The hair root receptor, the root hair plexus, is what it's usually referred to. This is how you know there's a mosquito crawling on your skin, because when they bump into that hair and move it, these nerves are fired, and they tell the brain exactly where something is on your skin. So it's kind of like an anti-bug thing. Okay, now the dermis and the epidermis have these papillae, and that's how they kind of interdigitate. And again, the epidermis is made up of epithelial tissue. We know epithelial tissue doesn't have a blood supply. The areolar loose connective tissue does. So all the blood for the epidermis has to go through there and actually diffuse. Right here we have an eccrine sweat gland. These sweat glands are going to be the ones that are going to put the water on the surface of our skin. They're going to secrete it along with all the other stuff we talked about, the urea and the salts. This is temperature regulation. There's another one called an apocrine sweat gland, but they actually come down here and do it more onto the hair shaft. Okay, sweat pore, that's just the opening of the sweat gland. Erector pili muscle, notice how that's spelled. Spelling counts in the lab, guys. That little muscle right there is what makes your hairs stand up on end when you're frightened or for whatever reason. When those hairs stand up on end, it actually pulls down on the surface of the skin in some places and pulls up, and that leaves the rest of the skin looking like it's pulled up. That's what a goosebump is, guys. Here are the sebaceous or the oil glands. These guys are on the hair root, just like so. They're going to secrete oil, which is going to not only keep the hair itself moisturized, but also it's going to keep the skin moisturized. Because if the skin dries out, it can crack and it'll fail in its job to keep out the bad guys. There's the hair root, the hair follicle. They're pointing at the same thing, but basically it is here. There's the follicle. There's the follicle. Cutaneous plexus are the blood vessels that are toward the bottom here. And see, these guys, this subpapillary plexus here, these guys are going to be the ones to open up to try to dump heat when we're overheated in the summer. Okay, guys, talking about these guys, so there's the lamellar or Pacinian corpuscle, showing where it's at and telling what it does: deep pressure, stretch, vibration, high frequency. These guys, the Ruffini endings, these guys are going to be for deep pressure and stretch. Now, these guys are rapidly adapting, and these guys are slowly adapting or non-adapting. What does that mean? That means once you've been pressed for a certain amount of time, these guys say, okay, and they stop. These guys either take a longer time to stop or they don't stop at all. The tactile, or the Meissner's corpuscles, are going to be for the light pressure, discriminative touch, think the fingertips, and low frequency vibration, and they too are rapidly adapting. Okay, the epidermis himself is divided into layers, and we're going to talk about those. Keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium is what these guys are going to be made of. They are avascular because they're epithelial cells. The main cell types are going to be the keratinocytes, which are going to be these guys about right here up. These keratin is the things that your fingernails are made out of. And these guys become bags of keratin. They actually die and they become bags of keratin. These guys are going to be tightly connected with those desmosomes. Everybody remember those? And these are going to be the main portion of our epidermis. Our epidermis is like the brake pads on your car. They're intended to wear out over time. That's why once every month, starting at this very bottom layer, we actually replace it. So the time for the cell to move from here to here is about 1 month. So we're constantly shedding our skin. We also have things called melanocytes. These guys, see if they've got one. There it is, right there. These guys are going to produce granules called melanin, and the melanin is going to be used as a dark pigmented particle to protect these guys in this bottom layer. Why? Because they're constantly dividing. If they get damaged by sunlight, they could easily become skin cancers, which happens a lot. So that's going to protect us against the radiation. The epidermal dendritic cells, see if we've got one. There he is. They're also called Langerhans. These guys are actually immune cells. So if you get a cut or a scrape and the bad guys get in, these guys are going to swallow them up, and then they're going to go show it to the immune system. And then the Merkel cells right there. The tactile disc, the sensory neuron. Remember, that is for light touch. Because remember, it is actually just right there at the border between the dermis and the epidermis, whereas the proscenium is further down. Okay, so there's our cells. Let's talk about our layers. Starting from the bottom, one layer thick is the stratum basal. It is the layer that is constantly undergoing mitosis. Of the two daughter cells that result, one stays and the other goes up. Then we have the stratum spinosum. These guys, they're on their way to producing keratin, becoming keratinocytes. And then finally, and of course, the blood vessels that supply food and oxygen, they're only effective about 10 cell layers up. So after 10 cell layers, everything that's up further than that begins to die from lack of food and oxygen, which is fine because we really do want the outside layer of our skin to be dead cells filled with the keratin. The stratum granulosum, about granules, these are lamellar granules that are in between them. These lamellar granules are waterproof, and they help make our skin waterproof because we don't want to absorb water, pure water, through our skin. Remember when we were talking about crenation and lysis? We don't want this. We want to keep our water exactly the concentration it's at. So that's there. Eventually, yeah, the skin you'll get overwhelmed if you spend enough time in the water, and the water will come in. That's what happens when people get all, when their toes and their fingers get crinkled, pruny-like, from excessive water time. Okay, that's stratum granulosum. Stratum lucidum. This guy is only going to be found on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet, and that's what we call thick skin. The rest of the body does not have a stratum lucidum. Stratum corneum is the outermost layer, completely dead, bags of keratin. They're going to fall off. Corneum means cornified, like from the keratin, and they are there to be abraded off. Okay, so the basal, the single layer, we've talked about that. A lot of melanocytes because of their sensitivity to ultraviolet radiation. Ultraviolet radiation can damage DNA, and that's the beginning of cancer. Stratum spinosum, some mitosis, and these guys are still being held together by desmosomes. Stratum granulosum, thin layer with those granules, waterproofing keratin and the lamellar granules. Stratum lucidum, we've talked about. Stratum corneum, 20 to 30 layers, dead keratinocytes. There's plasma membrane full of keratin. You guys can look look at these. This is a photomicrograph through a microscope, and of course this is an illustration. But use this to help you to learn these layers. Here's a skin slide, and you can see the papillary layer, lucerular, reticular layer. You can see the epidermis and all the keratinocytes, the stratum corneum. Stratified squamous epithelium, the apical cells, the one that are approaching the free edge, the basal cells down here, the cell nuclei, and then of course the connective tissue that it connects to. This is super excellent. It's even got pictures of Meissner's. So again, guys, just look at this according to your desire. This is good for naming the layers of the epidermis. What is the dermis? The dermis is the middle layer between the epidermis and the hypodermis. And just so you know, that's the part of animal skin that becomes leather. A lot of collagen, a lot of elastic fibers, although you start to lose those as you age. Papillary layer we've talked about. The dermal papillae attached to the epidermis. Large capillary network. We talked about the Meissner's. We've talked about the reticular. It's where the arteries, veins, sweat sebaceous, Pacinian. What is wrong about the picture on this slide? I don't even see a slide, so I guess there's nothing wrong with it. Okay. So there's, again, just another photomicrograph. It's basically the same stuff, guys. Skin glands. Okay, there is an apocrine sweat gland. These are only found in the axillary region and in the genitalia and the urogenital region. These guys produce a fatty sweat, and it's that fatty sweat that is broken down by bacteria that actually gives us the characteristic odor we associate with body odor. These glands do not become active until after puberty, so children, although they sweat, don't get body odor. Okay, let's continue on. Labeled skin slides, hair follicles, sebaceous. There's the erector pili. You guys don't need me to read to you on this. Okay, the accessory organs, the glands, the nails, and the hair. All of those come from the epidermis, but they live in the dermis. Cutaneous sebaceous glands. Sebum is the name of the oil that we secrete. There you can see the apocrine glands being associated with those areas. And then the sweat glands are also called sudoriferous. The eccrine, of course, are all over the body. The apocrine are the ones that produce that fatty sweat that the bacteria feast on. Okay, under the microscope, sebaceous gland, duct. There's a hair follicle. We know this guy's associated with the hair follicles. Those are the secretory cells that are going to produce the sebum and have them go through the duct. This is the exocrine gland, obviously. And, well, you can see it, they're all basically the same. Skin glands, sebaceous gland, that's a really good one right there. There's a slide, a section through it. There's the apocrine and then eccrine sweat glands. Fingernails. Okay, the body is this part right here, guys. It's what you really consider to be the fingernail. The free edge is the part that goes beyond the end of the finger. It's the part that gets trimmed. The root is the part that's underneath the cuticle there. The eponychium is just another name for the cuticle. Nail bed is an extension of the stratum basal. We've got a better picture, so I'm not going to go through all of this. The nail matrix. Let's go to the next one, as a matter of fact. Here we can see it a lot better. That little white spot there, it looks kind of like a crescent moon, is called lunella. Hyponychium is another name for the free edge. There's the nail bed. It's the skin that the nail sits on. The nail matrix is where the nail is coming from. And the root, of course, is the part that's right, that is under the skin. Proximal nail fold is that part of the skin, but not including the cuticle. Hairs. The hair root, you can see there, let's see, there, is going to be enclosed within the follicle. So this root portion is going to be inside the follicle. The shaft, of course, is the long part of it. Anything that's not the root is going to be the shaft. And it's the part that's going to actually go above the skin. The bulb will be right here, the hair papilla. The bulb is going to be right, let's see, there's the matrix, the melanocytes. Bulb is going to be right here. It's that rounded part that is actually part of the, it's what it's enclosing the root. Papilla is this area right here. You can see how it's kind of shaped like that. That's where the hair cells get their nutrition. And then erector pili muscle we've talked about. Now, if you look at these guys from a side view, then you can see that right there. You can see these different portions. The deepest part is going to be the medulla. The cortex is going to be the part on the outside of the medulla. The cuticle is going to be this part right here on the outside of the cortex. You've got an internal and external root sheath. Right there. And right there. Glassy membrane is on the outside of the root sheath. And then you have this connective tissue that's around all of it. This one, I'd spend some time on these guys. I really would. Probably on the skin, this is going to be the most confusing part. This is a really great one. Follicle wall, connective tissue. There's that glassy membrane that we were talking about. The external root sheath from there to there. The internal root sheath from here to here. And then this area right there is the cuticle, the cortex, and the medulla. It's kind of a little bit lighter in there. So that should be sufficient on that. Just more of the same, guys. So let me check off on our list because I want to make sure that we covered everything. Wow, excuse me. We talked about the 5 stratum that compose the epidermis. We talked about the papillary layer and the Meissner's corpuscles and the dermal papillae. We talked about the reticular layer, the erector pili, the eccrine sweat glands, Pacinian corpuscles, sebaceous glands. We talked about the hypodermis, follicle, hair bulb, hair matrix, papilla, and shaft are all that is actually on your list regarding the hair. Eponychium, hyponychium, uh, free edge, lanula, nail body, nail matrix are all that's on there. And that's everything that's on the skin, guys. So that wraps it up. We covered everything and maybe a little bit more, but that's okay. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next one.